Walk away, and none of this becomes your burden. Think about your daughter. If I walk away, everyone else carries it. I already am. Hand me the key before it's too late. This key was never meant for you.
Dad, whatever happens...
Then make your choice.
The reservoir wall shuddered hard enough to knock dust from the rafters. If Marcus Reed turned the brass key, he could save Bellwether or drown what was left of it. Rain hammered the control barn while muddy water climbed past his boots. Outside, families waited on rooftops as sirens wailed across the valley. Grant Mercer stood behind Sheriff Porter, holding a court order above his head. "Touch that system and you'll go to prison," he shouted. Marcus looked toward the doorway, where his 12-year-old daughter, Nia, stood soaked and trembling but refused to step back. The old key in his hand had belonged to Evelyn Wren, the elderly gardener everyone had dismissed until she left Marcus a farm, hiding a secret powerful enough to save an entire town. A steel gate groaned beneath the flood pressure. Marcus drew one breath, slid the key into the lock, and heard Nia say, "Dad, she trusted you for this. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is there, and subscribe for more powerful stories of courage, family, and justice." 6 months earlier, Bellwether, Missouri, looked like a town trying not to admit it was dying. The old grain elevator no longer ran at night. 2 storefronts on Main Street had plywood over their windows. The diner still opened at 5 every morning, but half the booths stayed empty. Farmers came in smelling of diesel and cold air, drank coffee they could barely afford, and talked about equipment loans, shrinking harvests, and which family might be the next to leave. Marcus Reed heard all of it from beneath a rusted John Deere tractor. "Hand me the 9/16", he called. A socket rolled across the concrete floor and tapped his shoulder. Marcus slid out from under the machine and looked up at Dale Harlan, who stood above him with a clipboard pressed to his chest. "That's a 1/2 inch, Marcus said. Dale glanced at the socket. "Close enough. Not if you want the bolt to survive." Dale exhaled through his nose. "Customer needs it by noon. The hydraulic line is split, the rear seal is leaking, and somebody welded the bracket crooked. So fix it." Marcus wiped grease across an already dirty rag. At 38, he still had the solid shoulders of a man who had once spent long days walking equipment fields, but exhaustion had carved faint lines around his eyes. His beard was trimmed short. His work jacket had been patched twice at the elbow. The faded name stitched above the pocket still read Marcus, though only half the letters were visible beneath oil stains. "I can fix it right," he said, "or I can fix it by noon." Dale looked toward the front office, where the phone was already ringing. "By noon," he said. Marcus held his gaze for a moment, then slid back beneath the tractor. Harlan Equipment Cooperative paid him $19 an hour, no matter how many machines he saved from the scrapyard. Dale called him the best mechanic in 3 counties whenever a customer was listening. When payday came, he treated Marcus like a man lucky to have a wrench in his hand. Marcus knew why. Bellwether had 1 repair shop. Moving would mean pulling Nia out of school again, taking a job in street. Louis would mean longer hours, higher rent, and no one to pick her up when the after-school program closed. So he stayed. At 4:23 that afternoon, Marcus clocked out 12 minutes early and lost a quarter hour of pay. He drove home in a 13-year-old pickup with a heater that worked only when the truck was moving faster than 30 miles per hour. A folded eviction warning sat beneath the cup holder. The landlord had circled the amount due in red ink. 2 months' rent. Marcus had told Nia they were catching up. He had not told her how far behind they really were. Their duplex sat near the edge of town, close enough to the railroad tracks that the windows trembled when freight trains passed. Inside, Nia stood in the living room, surrounded by cardboard, wires, and the remains of a desk fan. She looked up as he entered. "You're late. I'm 6 minutes early. You said you'd be home at 4:30. Marcus checked the clock. 4:36. Nia raised one eyebrow. At 12, she had already mastered the expression her mother used to wear when Marcus attempted a weak defense. "Traffic," he said. "There are 2 stop signs between here and the shop." One of them was aggressive. Nia tried not to smile. She failed. Her hair was gathered into 2 puff ponytails, and safety goggles rested on top of her head. On the table sat a clear plastic box mounted on 4 wheels. A homemade sensor protruded from the front. Marcus crouched beside it. "This, the famous collision avoidance machine?" "It's a prototype. That means it works sometimes. It means you're not allowed to touch it. He slowly pulled his hand back. Nia's science presentation began at 6. She had spent 3 weeks building a small robot that could detect an obstacle and stop before impact. Marcus had helped with the frame, but the wiring and code were hers. He had promised to sit in the front row. At 5:15, they loaded the project into his truck. At 5:29, sleet began ticking against the windshield. By 5:40, the 2-lane road outside Bellwether had turned silver. Marcus slowed as they passed the old feed mill. Nia sat beside him, holding the robot steady on her lap. Mrs. Alvarez said the judges might choose someone for the regional showcase, she said. They'd better choose you. You haven't seen the other projects. I don't need to. That is not scientific. It's father science. She rolled her eyes, but her mouth lifted at the corner. Then Marcus saw the pickup ahead. It sat crooked on the shoulder with its hazard lights flashing. The hood was raised. A trailer behind it carried a dozen young fruit trees wrapped in burlap, their thin branches whipping in the wind. An elderly woman stood beside the engine, one hand gripping the hood, the other trying to hold a flashlight. Marcus eased off the gas. Nia looked at the dashboard clock. Dad, I see her. We have 20 minutes. I know. The truck rolled closer. Marcus's hands tightened around the steering wheel. For one brief second, another road appeared in his mind. Rain on glass, a glowing phone on the passenger seat, Lena's name across the screen. He had let it ring because he was angry. She had left the house after their argument, and he had decided she could call back when they had both calmed down. She never did. The state trooper who came to the door later told him the crash happened 8 minutes after that unanswered call. Marcus blinked, and the road became cold and gray again. The woman beside the pickup stumbled as a gust of wind caught her coat. Marcus pulled onto the shoulder. Nia leaned back in her seat and stared at the ceiling. I know, he said quietly. You promised. I know. He turned on the hazard lights. And she's alone. For a moment, Nia said nothing. Then she placed the robot carefully on the floor. Marcus stepped into the sleep. The woman looked up sharply. She was small, perhaps 5'2", with a weathered face and silver hair tied beneath a green scarf. Mud covered the knees of her work pants. I already called someone, she said. Are they coming? She glanced toward the darkening road. Eventually, Marcus looked into the engine compartment. Try starting it. The starter clicked, but the engine did not turn over properly. Again, another click. Marcus reached past the battery and traced the fuel line with his fingers. When he found the crack, gasoline had already dampened the rubber. You've got a split line. Can it be repaired? Not the right way out here. She watched him remove a small emergency kit from behind his truck seat. What's the wrong way? The way that gets you home. He cut a short length of spare hose, fitted it over the damaged section, and tightened both ends with clamps from his toolbox. His fingers numbed in the cold. Sleet slid beneath his collar. Twice, the wind nearly took the rag from his hand. The elderly woman held the flashlight steady. You do this for a living? She asked. Mostly tractors. People pay you? Sometimes. She laughed softly. When Marcus finally told her to start the engine again, the pickup coughed once, then rumbled to life. The woman looked at him with open surprise. How much? Nothing. I don't accept free labor. Then call it roadside assistance. I didn't call you. That's why it's free. She studied him. Evelyn Wren. Marcus Reed. He nodded toward his truck. My daughter, Nia. Evelyn peered through the passenger window and gave Nia a small wave. Nia returned it, though her eyes kept drifting toward the clock. Where are you headed? Marcus asked. Wren Hollow Farm. That's 5 miles past the county line. 6 if you don't know the old road. You should not drive that alone with a temporary repair. I've driven worse in worse weather. I believe you. Marcus closed her hood. I'm still following you. The drive to Wren Hollow took 23 minutes. By the time they reached the farm, the sky had gone dark. Rows of bare orchard trees stretched across rolling land. Several greenhouses stood near a weathered red barn. Stone channels ran beside the road, half hidden beneath dead grass. Evelyn parked near a farmhouse with a deep porch. Marcus checked the fuel line once more while she unloaded a wooden crate from the truck bed. His eyes moved to an old brass valve lying beside it. He picked it up. This came from a vertical turbine system. Evelyn stopped. Marcus turned the piece over. Old gravity feed control, probably pre-1970. You don't see many of these anymore. The cold seemed to disappear from her face. You recognize it? My first engineering job involved restoring agricultural water systems. Engineering? Long time ago. Evelyn looked toward the dark fields, then back at him. You're more than a mechanic, Mr. Reed. Marcus placed the valve carefully inside the crate. Not tonight. When he and Nia finally reached the school, the last presentation had already begun. Nia stood in the hallway holding her robot against her chest while applause came through the gymnasium doors. Marcus crouched in front of her. I'm sorry. She looked away. He did not defend himself. He did not tell her she would understand when she was older. He simply waited. After a long silence, Nia asked, "Did the woman get home safe?" "Yes." "And the trees?" "Yes." She nodded once, though disappointment still shone in her eyes. "You still broke your promise." "I did." "But you couldn't leave her." "No." Nia looked through the glass panel in the gym door. Then she handed him the robot. "Next time," she said. "We leave earlier." Marcus smiled faintly. "That sounds fair." The next morning, just after 7, someone knocked on their door. Evelyn stood outside holding a basket of apples, a thermos of coffee, and the old brass valve. She looked directly at Marcus. "How much do you know?" she asked. "About keeping water where it belongs." Marcus turned the brass valve over in his hands. The metal was worn smooth around the edges, but the threads were clean, almost polished from years of careful maintenance. "I know enough," he said. "Enough to know this piece shouldn't still be working." Evelyn smiled. "Good." She handed Nia a paper bag filled with fresh apple muffins. "For yesterday, you didn't have to do that," Marcus said. "I wasn't thanking you for fixing my truck." "What then?" "For stopping." Those 2 words lingered long after she drove away. The following Saturday, Marcus's pickup rolled through the wooden gate of Wren Hollow Farm for the first time. Morning sunlight spread across acres of sleeping orchards. Bare apple branches stretched toward a pale blue sky. Old stone walls divided fields that looked neglected at first glance, yet nothing felt abandoned. Every path had been swept. Every tool had its place. Even the weathered greenhouse glass had been cleaned until it reflected the clouds. Nia climbed out slowly. "It feels." She searched for the right word. "Alive." Evelyn nodded. "That's because it is." She walked them through the property without hurry. This orchard is 87 years old. She rested a hand against a twisted apple tree. "My husband planted this one before we married." Marcus noticed narrow stone channels running beside nearly every row of trees. They're irrigation ditches. They were. They still could be. Evelyn looked at him with quiet interest. Most people only see rock. Marcus crouched beside one channel. Moss covered much of the stone, but beneath it he could still recognize carefully shaped limestone blocks. They weren't built for ordinary irrigation. "No, they're too deep. Keep going." Marcus followed the channel downhill. The grade is precise. Another 20 yards. The walls narrow intentionally. Another bend. This wasn't meant only to carry water. Evelyn waited. Marcus finally stood. "It controls water pressure." For the first time, genuine surprise crossed Evelyn's face. Thomas reached the same conclusion in less than 10 minutes. Marcus frowned. "Thomas?" "My husband." She looked toward the farmhouse. "He built most of this." The pump house stood near the western edge of the property. Inside, rust covered half the equipment. Marcus removed the front panel and immediately understood why the system kept failing. This bearing should have been replaced years ago. "I couldn't find anyone who knew how. There are companies. They wanted to replace everything." Marcus shook his head. "They don't build equipment like this anymore." He spent 4 hours rebuilding the pump, using salvaged parts from his truck and 2 bearings he found in Evelyn's workshop. When he finally flipped the switch, the ancient motor groaned, then settled into a steady hum. Water rushed beneath the floor. Nia laughed. "It sounds happy." Marcus smiled. "I think it does." Evelyn quietly wiped moisture from the corner of one eye before either of them could notice. When Marcus finished, Evelyn handed him an envelope. Inside were 6 $100 bills. He immediately pushed it back. "The parts weren't even 100. You worked all day. I helped a neighbor. You barely know me." Marcus smiled. "My daughter says that's never stopped me before." Evelyn studied him. "You're behind on rent." Marcus looked up sharply. "I noticed the notice sticking out of your truck yesterday." He remained silent. "You need the money." "I need to earn it." "You did." "I earned the parts." He removed $500 and placed it back into her hand. "I'll take 100. Evelyn frowned. "You're stubborn." "So I've been told." She laughed. So was Thomas. Spring slowly arrived. Every Saturday became another visit to Wren Hollow. Marcus repaired fencing, rebuilt greenhouse heaters, adjusted irrigation valves, restored an antique seed dryer. Nia planted herb, learned how to graft young apple branches, collected heirloom tomato seeds. Listened to Evelyn explain why healthy soil smelled different after rain. People think gardening is about growing plants, Evelyn said one afternoon. It isn't. It's about patience. Nia tilted her head. Plants grow whether you're patient or not. They do. So why does patience matter? Because people don't. Nia thought about that for several seconds before quietly writing it inside her notebook. Marcus noticed. So now you're collecting wisdom too? I'm collecting evidence. For what? That old people secretly know everything. Evelyn burst into laughter so suddenly she nearly dropped her watering can. Not everyone appreciated Marcus spending time there. Late one afternoon, as Marcus finished repairing another irrigation valve, the sound of expensive tires rolled across the gravel driveway. A black luxury SUV stopped beside the farmhouse. Grant Mercer stepped out. His tailored coat looked absurdly clean against the muddy farm road. Behind him came Calvin Rusk, carrying a leather briefcase. Grant removed his sunglasses. Eveline, you know where the gate is, Evelyn answered. I came with another offer. I've already answered. The market has changed. My answer hasn't. Grant nodded politely. This time, Calvin opened the briefcase. $900,000. Even Marcus looked surprised. Nearly $1 million. For a farm that produced little income. Grant noticed his expression. See? Even your mechanic understands. Marcus didn't answer. Grant walked toward him. You work here? I help when I can. Good. Grant handed him a business card. When she finally decides to sell, I'll need someone who understands the equipment. Marcus glanced at the card. Mercer Land and Water Development. I already have a job. Grant smiled. Everyone has a price. Marcus calmly folded the card once, then handed it back. My father taught me something. Grant raised an eyebrow. If someone starts talking about money before they talk about people. Marcus looked him directly in the eye. They're usually buying the wrong thing. Silence settled across the yard. Grant's smile faded only slightly. Eveline. He turned toward her again. You're protecting sentiment. No. What then? I'm protecting responsibility. Grant gestured around the farm. This land is dying. It breathes better than your office. It could employ hundreds. It could. So sell. Evelyn stepped closer. You offered a price for dirt. Grant frowned. This farm isn't dirt. She pointed toward the orchards. You still don't know what you're buying. For the first time, something flashed across Grant's face. Not confusion. Recognition. It disappeared almost immediately. But Marcus saw it. Grant knew exactly what lay beneath Wren Hollow. The drive home felt unusually quiet. Finally, Nia spoke. Why would someone pay that much? Marcus kept both hands on the steering wheel. I've been asking myself the same thing. It isn't because of apples. No. The greenhouses? No. The house? Marcus shook his head. There's something else. What? I don't know yet, but his mind kept returning to the stone channels, the oversized valves, the unusual slope of the land, the hidden engineering beneath the orchard. Nothing about Wren Hollow had been designed by accident. Monday morning began like every other, until Dale Harlan called Marcus into the office. Dale wouldn't meet his eyes. You've been doing work for Evelyn Wren. On weekends, Mercer called. Marcus already knew where the conversation was going. He says you're interfering with one of his business projects. I repaired a water pump. He threatened to cancel every commercial maintenance contract we have. Marcus stared at him. So if that happens, Dale swallowed. I'll have to lay off 3 men. And your solution is to fire one. I don't have a choice. Marcus looked around the tiny office. Family photographs, invoices, coffee stains. 20 years of a business barely surviving. You do have a choice. Dale closed his eyes. I know. Marcus removed his work gloves, folded them carefully, placed them on the desk. When do I leave? Dale's voice cracked. Now. Marcus nodded once. No argument, no shouting. He simply picked up his toolbox and walked through the repair shop one final time. The mechanic stopped working. No one spoke. Outside, cold wind swept across the parking lot. Marcus placed the toolbox in the back of his truck. His phone buzzed. It was Evelyn. He answered. Marcus? I'm on my way. You sound tired. I lost my job. Silence. I'm sorry. It isn't your fault. He started the engine. I'll explain when I get there. When Marcus reached Wren Hollow less than 30 minutes later, something immediately felt wrong. The greenhouse door hung open. Glass covered the ground like ice. Inside, flower pots lay overturned. Shelves had been ripped apart. Soil was scattered across the concrete floor. Near the oldest stone irrigation channel, A bright orange survey marker had been driven deep into the earth. Stamped into the metal base were 5 unmistakable words: Mercer, Land and Water Develop. Marcus slowly bent down and pulled the marker free. Then he noticed something else: fresh boot prints leading directly toward the oldest section of the orchard. Marcus crouched beside the boot prints without touching them. The morning frost had preserved every ridge of the tread. Whoever had walked through the orchard had done so after the previous night's rain, which meant the tracks were only a few hours old. "Don't step here," he called. Nia stopped immediately. Evelyn emerged from the greenhouse carrying a broom she clearly had no intention of using. Her shoulders were straight, but Marcus could see the tremor in her hand. "I found it like this at sunrise," she said quietly. Marcus looked around the shattered greenhouse again. Clay pots lay broken across the floor. Seed trays had been overturned. Shelves had been ripped from the walls, yet expensive gardening tools remained untouched. They weren't stealing. No, they were searching. Evelyn nodded once. They knew exactly where to look. Marcus followed the boot prints toward the orchard until they disappeared beside one of the old stone channels. He frowned. "That's strange." "What?" "They walked here." He pointed toward the mud, but they didn't walk back. Nia stepped closer, careful to avoid the tracks. "How is that possible?" Marcus studied the ground. "The soil is too soft. If they left this way, we'd see another set." He slowly looked around the orchard. Unless... His eyes settled on a thick patch of ivy covering part of a limestone wall. He brushed the vines aside. Behind them was a narrow iron door, nearly invisible beneath decades of moss. Its lock had fresh scrape marks. Someone had tried to force it open. "They knew about this," Marcus whispered. Evelyn's expression hardened. "I hope they didn't. You've never shown me this door." "I've never shown anyone." Marcus looked back toward the greenhouse. "They weren't looking for tools." "No. They were looking for whatever's behind this." Evelyn didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket and touched a small key hanging from a leather cord around her neck. "Not today," she murmured. Sheriff Elaine Porter arrived less than an hour later. She parked her patrol SUV beside the farmhouse and climbed out carrying a notebook instead of assumptions. She was in her early 50s, practical, calm, and known throughout Bellwether for refusing to rush to conclusions. "What have we got?" she asked. Marcus led her through the greenhouse. No electronics missing. No cash. No equipment. Sheriff Porter scribbled notes. "So vandalism?" Marcus shook his head. "It looks like vandalism." She glanced at him. "You think otherwise?" "They ignored $10,000 worth of tool." He pointed toward the empty filing cabinet, "but every maintenance record is gone." The sheriff opened one drawer after another. Only dust remained. "What was in here?" Evelyn answered. "Maps." "What kind?" "Old farm records," Marcus added quietly. "Engineering drawings." Sheriff Porter stopped writing. "Engineering? Water systems." He looked toward the orchards. "For irrigation?" Marcus hesitated. "I don't think that's all." The sheriff noticed the orange survey marker lying beside the port. She picked it up. "Mercer, Land and Water." Marcus nodded. "I found it beside the oldest channel." Sheriff Porter sighed. "That doesn't prove Grant Mercer put it there." "I know, but it proves someone wants us to think about him." Marcus appreciated that answer. She wasn't dismissing his suspicion. She simply refused to let suspicion become evidence. "I'll file the report," she said. "If anything else turns up, call me before touching it." After the sheriff left, Marcus walked the entire property alone. The more he looked, the stranger the farm became. The stone channels never wandered randomly. Every turn followed precise angle. Every slope seemed intentional. Several channels disappeared beneath the ground before reappearing hundreds of feet away. This wasn't an old-fashioned irrigation system. It was something far more sophisticated. Near the western pasture, he found another structure almost completely hidden beneath vine. A circular stone basin, 40 feet across. Empty. Crack, yet remarkably intact. He climbed down carefully. Near the center stood an iron column connected to 4 massive underground pipes. Marcus brushed away decades of dirt. Cast into the metal were faded letters. Wright Hydraulic Company. He stared for several seconds. They built municipal water systems. His voice echoed softly. Not farms, cities. That evening, Marcus sat on Evelyn's porch drinking coffee while the sunset turned the orchard's gold. "You knew I would figure it out. I hoped you would. This farm was designed for more than growing fruit." "Yes." Marcus waited. Evelyn rested both hands around her mug. "My husband Thomas believed a farm should feed people. It does. He thought it should protect them too." Marcus looked toward the empty basin. "The reservoir." She nodded. It connects to natural limestone aquifers beneath Bellwether. Marcus leaned forward. The entire town, most of it. His engineering instincts came alive. If someone controlled the gates, they could redirect floodwater. Marcus slowly turned toward her, or provide emergency water during drought. Exactly. He stood. Me God. Evelyn's voice remained calm. Thomas spent 30 years maintaining a system most people believed had stopped working decades ago. Marcus looked across the rolling fields again. Every strange detail suddenly made sense. The oversized valve, the unusual grades, the hidden channels, the impossible offer from Grant Mercer. $900,000. He hadn't been buying farmland. He'd been trying to buy water. 3 days later, Evelyn collapsed while pruning roses. Marcus caught her before she hit the ground. Evain. She tried to answer but couldn't catch her breath. Within minutes, they were speeding toward Bellwether Community Clinic. Dr. Priya Shah met them at the emergency entrance. After nearly an hour, she stepped into the waiting room. Marcus rose immediately. Is she okay? Dr. Shah removed her glasses. She'll recover from today's episode. Marcus exhaled. But the heart condition is progressing faster than I'd hoped. How long? The doctor looked through the small window toward Evelyn's room. I can't promise. Marcus nodded silently. Naya reached for his hand. He squeezed her. Neither of them noticed the black luxury SUV pulling into the clinic parking lot. Grant Mercer entered carrying a bouquet of white lilies. Calvin Rusk followed with a leather folder tucked beneath one arm. Grant smiled politely. Marcus. Marcus didn't return it. What are you doing here? I came to check on Evelyn. You two aren't exactly friends. Grant's smile never changed. We disagree about buying her farm, among other things. Rachel at the reception desk called Grant toward the nurse's station. A few minutes later, voices rose from Evelyn's room. No. Evelyn's voice, weak but unmistakably firm. I never agreed. Marcus stepped inside. Grant stood beside the bed holding several papers. Calvin opened the folder. Evelyn, Grant said patiently, perhaps you simply forgot. I forget birthdays. She looked directly at him. I don't forget selling my life's work. Calvin slid a document across the blanket. The purchase agreement. Marcus glanced down. His stomach tightened. There it was. Evelyn's signature. Perfect. Dated only 2 weeks earlier. Purchase price. 9美元. Transfer of Wren Hollow Farm. Water rights. Mineral rights. Agricultural infrastructure. Everything. Marcus looked at Evelyn. She stared at the signature as though seeing it for the first time. I signed tax papers, she whispered. Not this. Grant folded his hands. The notarization is valid. Evelyn slowly shook her head. No. Calvin spoke evenly. We have every legal document required. Marcus stepped between them, then explained why she remembers nothing about selling. Grant answered before Calvin could. Age affects memory. The room became very still. Evelyn's eyes flashed with anger. My heart may be failing. She looked straight at Grant. My mind is not. Dr. Shah entered immediately after hearing the raised voices. Visiting hours are over. Grant gathered his papers without argument. As he reached the door, he paused beside Marcus. Quietly enough that only Marcus could hear, he said, some battles end better when people accept reality. Then he walked away. Marcus looked back at the contract, still lying across Evelyn's blanket. Everything about the signature looked genuine. Too genuine, which frightened him even more, because if Evelyn was telling the truth, someone hadn't forged her handwriting. Someone had found a way to make her sign something she never intended. Marcus picked up the document one final time. Near the bottom, beside the witness seal, one unfamiliar name caught his attention. Notary, Franklin Doss. He had never heard the name before, but before the week was over, that single signature would become the first crack in Grant Mercer's carefully built empire. Marcus did not sleep that night. The copy of the purchase agreement lay open across his kitchen table beside 2 cups of untouched coffee. Nia had gone to bed hours earlier, but the light beneath her bedroom door had stayed on until nearly midnight. She knew her father well enough to recognize the silence that settled over him whenever a problem refused to fit together. Marcus studied the signature again. Every curve matched Evelyn's handwriting. The pressure points looked natural. Even the slight upward lift at the end of her last name was identical to the birthday card she had written for Nia only a month earlier. It isn't forged, he whispered. Not completely. He picked up his phone and enlarged a photograph he had taken of the document at the clinic. His eyes stopped at one detail, the date. March 14. He frowned. March 14. He reached for an old calendar hanging beside the refrigerator. March 14 had been the day Evelyn was treated for dehydration after collapsing while working in her greenhouse. Marcus remembered because he had driven her home that afternoon. She had barely been able to stand. She certainly had not spent 2 hours reviewing legal contracts. The realization sent a chill through him. The signature might be real, but the circumstances surrounding it were anything but. The following morning, Marcus drove to the regional legal aid office 40 miles away. Rachel Kim greeted him with a firm handshake. She was in her early 40s, sharp-eyed, practical, and known for accepting cases that wealthier attorneys considered unwinnable. "You have 15 minutes, she said, leading him into a conference room. Marcus spread photographs across the table. "The woman who owns this farm says she never agreed to sell it." Rachel scanned the paperwork. "The signature appears authentic." "I know. So why are you here?" Marcus slid the calendar across the table. "Because this is the day she supposedly signed it." Rachel compared the dates, then looked up. "Tell me everything." For nearly an hour, Marcus explained Evelyn, the farm, Grant Mercer, the break-in, the missing engineering records, and the hidden irrigation system beneath the orchards. Rachel interrupted only occasionally. "Did anyone witness the signing?" "I don't know." "Was Evelyn represented by an attorney?" "No." "Did the notary meet her personally?" "I've never seen him." Rachel leaned back. "You're asking me to challenge a contract signed by an elderly woman against one of the richest developers in the county. I'm asking you to find out whether she was deceived." Rachel folded her hands. "Those are two different cases." Marcus nodded. "I know." She remained quiet for several moments. Finally, she said, "I'll meet her." Evelyn welcomed Rachel into the farmhouse 2 days later. They spoke privately for almost an hour while Marcus repaired a greenhouse heater outside. When Rachel finally emerged, she carried a yellow legal pad filled with notes. "Well?" Rachel looked toward the old farmhouse before answering. "She's remarkably clear." Marcus released a slow breath. "Good. She remembers signing tax documents. Nothing else?" "No." Rachel paused. "More importantly, she tapped the purchase agreement. She described the room where she signed those papers." Marcus waited. "The contract says it was executed in Calvin Rusk's office." "And?" "She has never been there." Marcus stared at her. "She says Calvin came here." Rachel nodded. "If she's telling the truth, this document may have been assembled after the signature was obtained." Marcus felt the first genuine spark of hope in days. Hope, however, did not pay rent. Marcus spent the next several weeks accepting every repair job anyone offered. He replaced fences, fixed lawn tractors, welded broken gates, installed irrigation pumps. Some customers paid him $50. Others couldn't afford cash. One elderly farmer handed him 2 frozen chickens. Another insisted Marcus take fresh eggs instead of payment. Nia carefully recorded every dollar in a small notebook. One evening, she placed the ledger in front of him. "We're still behind." Marcus nodded. "I know." She hesitated. "We could move." His hand stopped. "Where?" "Anywhere cheaper." Marcus smiled sadly. "There's no such thing anymore." She looked down. "I don't want you working all night." He reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I've done harder things," but he wasn't sure that was true. One Saturday afternoon, while replacing wooden posts along the orchard fence, Evelyn carried 2 glasses of lemonade into the shade. "You've been avoiding questions." Marcus laughed softly. "I didn't know I was." "You have." She handed him a glass. "You recognized my valves the first day." Marcus stared across the fields. "I used to design irrigation systems." "You said engineering." "I worked for Midwestern Ag Systems in Street Lewitt." "The large company?" He nodded. "I supervised field installation." Evelyn studied him. "That wasn't a small job." "No." "What happened?" Marcus looked toward Nia, who was collecting wildflower seeds nearby. Only after she wandered farther into the orchard did he answer. "My wife died." The words came quietly. After that, he shrugged. Nothing seemed important. Evelyn didn't interrupt. "I couldn't sleep. I stopped making decisions. I kept wondering whether every choice would hurt someone." He picked up a loose stone. "Eventually, I quit." "You walked away?" "I ran." Silence settled between them. Finally, Evelyn spoke. "You think leaving protected your daughter?" Marcus didn't answer. "It protected you." Those words landed harder than Marcus expected, because somewhere inside, he knew they were true. As the afternoon cooled, Evelyn unlocked an old cedar chest inside the farmhouse. She lifted out several worn journals tied together with leather straps. Thomas kept these. Marcus carefully opened the first notebook. Every page contained hand-drawn diagrams, water flow calculations, reservoir measurements, seasonal rainfall records, margin notes written in tiny, precise handwriting. "This is incredible." He believed every problem had a pattern. Marcus smiled. "I would have liked him. So would he." Evelyn's smile faded. He never forgave himself. "For what?" She looked toward the window overlooking the western fields. "The flood." Marcus remained silent. 40 years ago, our son Daniel was 16. He was helping Thomas inspect the reservoir. The storm came faster than anyone expected. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the table. The emergency gates failed. She closed her eyes. The water turned. Daniel never made it home. Marcus lowered the notebook. I'm so sorry. The town blamed Thomas. They said the reservoir caused the flooding. They said he built it wrong. But he spent the rest of his life proving someone had interfered with it. Marcus looked up. You believe him. I know him. She reached into the chest again. There should be one more notebook. Marcus searched. Nothing. Evelyn frowned. It was here. What was in it? The last 2 years of his investigation. Marcus's expression changed. The pages stolen during the break-in. I believe so. The room grew quiet. Someone had not been searching randomly. They had known exactly which records mattered. That evening, Nia wandered into the farmhouse carrying fresh herbs. She found Marcus staring at Thomas's journals. You've read the same page 3 times. I have. What are you thinking? Marcus looked at the faded sketches. I keep wondering whether I'm making the right choices. Nia leaned against the table. You always say doing the right thing isn't the same as doing the easy thing. I do. So why don't you believe yourself? Marcus smiled faintly. Because adults are complicated. No. She shook her head. They just think too much. He laughed for the first time all day. You sound like your mother. I'll take that as a compliment. Marcus reached over and hugged her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Late that night, after Evelyn had gone to bed, Marcus returned to Thomas's journals. He wanted to understand the reservoir better. Instead, something entirely different caught his eye. One page had been folded inward. Inside the fold was a loose sheet of yellowed paper that had escaped whoever stole the missing notebook. The handwriting was hurried. Unlike Thomas's careful notes, these words looked as though they had been written in panic. Marcus read the single paragraph once. Then again, his heartbeat quickened. At the bottom of the page, beneath the date of the historic flood, one sentence had been underlined twice. The man from Mercer's company closed Gate 4 before the storm. Marcus slowly lowered the paper. Outside, the wind moved through the orchard exactly as it had 40 years earlier. For the first time, the tragedy that had destroyed the Wren family no longer looked like an accident. It looked like the beginning of a crime. Marcus read the final sentence 3 more times before carefully sliding the yellowed page into a plastic document sleeve. The man from Mercer's company closed Gate 4 before the storm. Not someone. Not I think. Thomas Wren had written it as a fact. Still, 40-year-old words were not enough to win a courtroom. He needed proof. The next morning, Marcus, Rachel, Kim, and Evelyn sat around the farmhouse dining table. Rachel placed Thomas's journals beside the purchase agreement. If this note is genuine, she said, it changes the history of the flood. Marcus nodded. But it doesn't prove who actually closed Gate 4. Exactly. Rachel looked toward Evelyn. Did Thomas ever tell you the man's name? Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment. He said it once. And? I've spent 40 years trying to remember. She pressed her fingertips against her temple. I remember the face, the truck, the company logo, but not the name. Marcus looked at Thomas's notebooks again. He wouldn't accuse someone without evidence. No, Evelyn said quietly. Thomas documented everything. Rachel turned another page. There might be something missing. There is. Marcus explained the stolen notebook and the break-in. Rachel immediately understood. They weren't stealing history. They were removing evidence. Rachel's first phone call that afternoon was not to another lawyer. It was to the Bellwether County Archives. By sunset, they were standing inside a basement filled with filing cabinets older than Marcus himself. A woman with silver hair looked up from behind thick glasses. Miriam Cole? Rachel asked. The woman smiled. Depends who's asking. Rachel Kim, the attorney? So my reputation has reached the archive. Miriam laughed. I hear everything eventually. Marcus explained Thomas Wren's journals. The old flood. The missing records. Grant Mercer. Miriam's expression slowly changed. I wondered when someone would come asking. Marcus leaned forward. You've heard this before? I've heard whispers for 40 years. She unlocked a cabinet labeled County Infrastructure, 1975 to 1990. Dust floated into the air. After the flood, Miriam said, a surprising number of public records disappeared. What kind? Drainage permits, construction inspection, flood control surveys. Rachel frowned. Destroyed? No. Requested. By whom? Miriam slid out a thick ledger. She opened it carefully. Marcus watched her finger stop beside one entry. Mercer Construction Company. Request date, October 18. 3 weeks after the flood, requested documents, drainage surveys, reservoir engineering reports, gate maintenance records, every file Thomas would have needed. Marcus looked up. They took them? They borrowed them. Were they returned? Miriam slowly closed the ledger. No. On the drive home, no one spoke for nearly 20 miles. Finally, Rachel broke the silence. Grant Mercer wasn't even born when the flood happened. Marcus nodded. I know, but his father was, Leonard Mercer. Rachel looked out the passenger window. If Leonard buried the truth, Marcus finished the thought. Grant may have inherited more than the company. Meanwhile, Grant Mercer was speaking to a crowd inside Bellwether's old community center. Nearly 200 residents filled the folding chairs. A large banner behind him read, Building Bellwether's Future. Grant smiled confidently. Our town has waited decades for real investment. Applause followed. My company is prepared to build a regional agricultural distribution center. More applause. 300 new jobs. Louder applause. Improved roads. Tax revenue. New businesses. Families staying instead of leaving. People began nodding. Then someone asked the question Marcus had feared. What about Wren Hollow Farm? Grant sighed dramatically. I wish Mrs. Wren had accepted my offer. He lowered his voice. But unfortunately, he paused just long enough. Certain individuals have convinced her to reject progress. A woman stood. You mean that mechanic? Grant smiled sadly. I don't question his intentions, but I do question whether an unemployed repairman should influence the future of our town. Murmurs spread through the audience. Grant never raised his voice. He didn't need to. He simply planted doubt. The next morning, Marcus felt the consequences. 3 scheduled repair jobs were canceled. One customer called to apologize. I'm sorry, Marcus. My wife says we shouldn't get involved. Involved in what? The lawsuit. There isn't even a lawsuit yet. I know. I'm sorry. Click. Another customer never answered the door. A third left an envelope with $20 taped to the porch. Inside was a handwritten note. You're a good man. I just can't afford to lose Mercer as a customer. Marcus folded the note carefully. He wasn't angry. He understood. People trying to feed their families rarely gamble against the richest man in town. Unfortunately, adults were not the only ones feeling the pressure. Nia found it waiting at school. She opened her locker. A newspaper clipping fluttered to the floor. Someone had circled Grant Mercer's smiling campaign photograph. Across it, written in black marker, your dad is stealing an old lady's farm. She quietly picked it up, folded it, placed it inside her backpack. She never mentioned it until lunch. Tyler Boone slid into the seat across from her. My dad says your father got fired. Nia kept eating. He says he's trying to trick that old woman. No answer. My dad also says she'll be dead soon anyway. The cafeteria became strangely quiet. Nia slowly set down her fork. My dad doesn't trick people. Tyler shrugged. Then why'd she give him all her attention? Because he helped her. My dad says nobody helps for free. Nia looked directly at him. Maybe your dad doesn't. She stood and walked away before the argument could grow, but the words stayed with her. That evening, Marcus noticed she was unusually quiet. Everything okay? Yeah. You sure? She nodded. Then after a long pause, asked, Dad? If everyone believes a lie, Marcus looked over. Does the truth stop being true? He set down the wrench he had been cleaning. No. It just gets lonelier. Nia stared at the floor. They think you're stealing. Marcus forced a small smile. I've been called worse. I don't like it. I know. She looked up. Do you ever think about quitting? Marcus didn't answer immediately. The question hurt because he already had, more than once, especially after losing his job, especially after seeing the eviction notice, especially after watching Nia carry burdens she never should have known. Finally, he admitted, yes. Nia nodded slowly. I figured. Marcus looked surprised. How? You keep staring at the contract. Silence. You want to protect me, always. But if you quit because people lie, she swallowed. Then they didn't beat you. Marcus listened carefully. You beat yourself. Those words landed with unexpected force. For a moment, he saw Lena again. He remembered every decision he had avoided after losing her, every opportunity he had walked away from, because failure seemed safer than trying. Nia reached across the kitchen table. I'd rather kids laugh at me because my dad helped someone. She squeezed his hand, than admire you because you abandoned her. Marcus blinked hard, then smiled. You've been spending too much time with Evelyn. Nia smiled back. Probably. The following afternoon, Rachel called. I found something. Marcus drove straight to her office. Spread across her desk were aerial photographs purchased from the county planning department. Rachel pointed to several parcels surrounding Bellwether. Notice anything? Marcus leaned closer. Every highlighted property sat downstream from Wren Hollow. Who owns them? Grant Mercer. All of them? He bought most within the last 5 years. Marcus studied the map. None of the land was especially valuable, unless... His eyes widened. If he controlled the reservoir, Rachel nodded. He'd control emergency water flow. Marcus continued tracing the parcels, and these lots would become the safest commercial property in the county. Rachel handed him another document. There's more. It was an old infrastructure proposal from nearly 30 years earlier. Across the top, someone had handwritten a single sentence. Future municipal water expansion dependent upon Wren Hollow easements. Marcus slowly lowered the paper. Grant Mercer hadn't been chasing an old farm. He had been chasing the future of the entire town. Just then, Marcus's phone vibrated. It was Sheriff Porter. Her voice was unusually serious. Marcus, what happened? I think you need to come to the county engineering office. Why? We found something behind a false wall. Marcus exchanged a glance with Rachel. What is it? Sheriff Porter took a slow breath. A survey map. Marcus waited. And if this map is authentic, she paused. Grant Mercer knew exactly what Wren Hollow was worth long before he ever made Evelyn his first offer. Sheriff Elaine Porter laid the survey map across the conference table with both hands. The paper was brittle around the edges, its corners stained by decades of dust. Someone had folded it so many times that the creases looked ready to split apart. Marcus leaned closer. Bellwether stretched across the center of the page. The river, the western hill, the old drainage channels. Then his eyes stopped on a section outlined in red. Wren Hollow Hydraulic Reserve. His pulse quickened. Rachel Kim looked up at the sheriff. This is official? Sheriff Porter nodded. It was hidden behind a false wall in the old county engineering office. Marcus traced a faded blue line with his finger. It connects everything. Rachel frowned. What do you mean? Marcus pointed one by one. The reservoir, the limestone aquifer, the emergency overflow channels, the south side drainage basin. He looked toward them. This farm isn't just protecting itself. He swallowed. It was designed to protect Bellwether. Silence filled the room. Sheriff Porter broke it first. If this had been public, the town would have never abandoned it. Marcus finished. But someone had known. On the lower right corner of the survey map was another handwritten note. Property acquisition priority. Control Wren Hollow to control future municipal water expansion. Beneath it was a date. 32 years earlier. Rachel stared at it. That's before Grant Mercer took over the company. Marcus nodded. This started with Leonard, the father, and Grant simply continued. Sheriff Porter folded the map carefully. I still need evidence that connects the old plan to current actions. Marcus understood. The map proved motive. Not crime, not yet. That evening, Marcus drove to Wren Hollow as the sun dipped behind the hills. He found Evelyn sitting beneath the oldest apple tree, wrapped in a wool blanket. Nia knelt beside her, planting tiny spring flowers around the trunk. Evelyn smiled when Marcus approached. You found something. He sat beside her. The county hid a survey. No, it was hidden. She corrected him gently. There's a difference. Marcus laughed softly. I suppose there is. He explained everything. The hydraulic reserve, the protected aquifer, the long-term development plans. When he finished, Evelyn looked toward the orchard. Thomas said the town would need the system again someday. You believed him. I married him. Marcus smiled. You trusted him that much? I trusted the kind of man he was. The words lingered. Marcus suddenly realized Evelyn wasn't talking only about Thomas anymore. She was studying him with that same quiet certainty. Over the next week, Evelyn's strength faded quickly. She tired after walking only a few yards. She no longer climbed the greenhouse steps without help. Some afternoons, she simply sat on the porch while Nia read aloud from gardening book. Marcus repaired fences nearby, pretending not to notice how often Evelyn stopped to catch her breath. One evening, after Nia had gone inside to make tea, Evelyn spoke without looking at him. You're afraid. Marcus kept sanding a broken gate. Of losing this fight? No. She smiled faintly. Of losing people. His hands stopped. I've already lost enough. You think loving someone guarantees pain. Marcus stared at the unfinished gate. It guarantees risk. She nodded. Yes. Then she looked at him, but avoiding love guarantees regret. Marcus didn't answer, because there was nothing to argue with. A week later, The orchard bloomed. White blossoms covered every row. The air smelled of damp earth and apple flowers. Evelyn insisted on planting one last young tree herself. Marcus tried to stop her. "You should rest." "I've rested enough." Nia carried the sapling. Marcus dug the hole. Together, the three of them lowered the little tree into the soil. Evelyn pressed dirt around the roots with trembling hands. "Trees," she said softly, "are promises you make to people you'll never meet." Nia looked up. "What if they never grow?" "They grow." Evelyn smiled. "Sometimes without us." Marcus quietly placed his hand over the fresh soil. He had no idea those would become the last trees Evelyn Wren would ever plant. That night, the phone rang just after midnight. Marcus answered on the second ring. Dr. Priya Shah spoke gently. "I'm sorry. Nothing else was necessary." Marcus closed his eyes. Beside him, Nia already understood. She had heard the doctor's voice. Neither of them cried immediately. Some grief arrived too quietly for tears. Bellwether gathered 4 days later beneath a gray spring sky. The small church had not been this full in years. Farmers stood beside teachers. Former students sat beside retired mechanics. Even people who had not spoken to Evelyn in decades came to pay their respect. Marcus and Nia sat in the second pew. Near the back of the church stood Grant Mercer, dressed in black, head respectfully lowered. Anyone who didn't know him might have mistaken him for a grieving friend. After the service, he approached Marcus outside. "My condolences." Marcus looked at him without expression. "Thank you." Grant slipped his hands into his coat pockets. "I truly admired Evelyn." Marcus said nothing. Grant continued. "Now that she's gone, there it was. Perhaps we can finally resolve this peacefully." Marcus met his eyes. "The funeral ended 5 minutes ago." Grant's smile barely changed. "I simply don't want unnecessary legal complications." "You'll survive." Grant leaned slightly closer. "No." His voice became almost sympathetic. "You won't." Then he walked toward his waiting SUV. 2 days later, the probate courtroom was filled beyond capacity. Rachel sat beside Marcus. Nia squeezed his hand. Grant and Calvin occupied the opposite table. Judge Harold Vance adjusted his glasses. "We are here for the reading of the last will and testament of Evelyn Grace Wren." The courtroom became perfectly still. The clerk opened a sealed envelope. Marcus expected the farmhouse to be donated to a preservation society, perhaps the orchards to the county, maybe everything sold for charity. He certainly did not expect to hear his own name. "I leave Wren Hollow Farm." The clerk paused, including all agricultural structures, equipment, seed archives, water rights, mineral rights, and remaining financial assets. Marcus frowned. "To Marcus Elijah Reed." The courtroom erupted. People gasped. Someone actually stood. Grant's chair scraped violently across the floor. "What?" The judge struck his gavel. "Order." Grant stared at Marcus in open disbelief. Marcus himself looked equally stunned. "There must be some mistake." "There is no mistake," the clerk answered. Marcus barely heard the rest. Nia slowly turned toward him. "Dad," he whispered back. "I didn't know." She nodded. "I know." When the courtroom quieted again, the clerk unfolded another page. "There is an accompanying personal letter." Rachel looked surprised. Judge Vance nodded. "Read it." The clerk continued. "If you are hearing these words, then my time in the orchard has ended. Wren Hollow has never belonged to me. I merely cared for it until the right steward arrived. I did not choose Marcus Reed because he repaired my machine. I chose him because he stopped his truck on a freezing evening when there was nothing to gain by doing so. A person who helps when no one is watching is the only kind of person I would trust with land that exists to protect others." The courtroom fell silent again. Marcus lowered his head. Across the aisle, Grant Mercer slowly clenched his jaw, but the letter was not finished. "There is one final instruction." The clerk unfolded another sealed sheet. "My attorney will find enclosed documents proving that I began searching for my successor months before meeting Marcus Reed. My original will instructed that Wren Hollow pass only to a qualified steward, selected by character, practical knowledge, and commitment to service, not by blood, wealth, or influence. Marcus's name was added only after those conditions had been fulfilled." Rachel's eyes widened. She immediately understood. Grant's entire argument that Marcus had manipulated Evelyn into changing her will had just suffered a devastating blow. Evelyn had planned her succession long before Marcus ever entered her life. Grant rose to his feet anyway. "I formally contest this will." Judge Vance looked down. "On what grounds?" "Undue influence." Rachel calmly stood. "Your Honor, the accompanying documents directly contradict that allegation." Grant's face hardened. "This isn't over." "No," Rachel replied. "It isn't." An hour later, after the courtroom had emptied, Marcus walked alone through the farmhouse. Nothing felt different, yet everything had changed. He opened the old kitchen cabinet. Evelyn's favorite teacup still sat exactly where she had left it. The porch swing still creaked. The wind still moved through the orchard. But now the responsibility belonged to him. Rachel entered carrying several folders. "I've finished reviewing the financial records." Marcus looked up hopefully. "How bad?" Rachel hesitated. "Worse than I expected." She handed him a ledger. "Outstanding property taxes, equipment loans, historique maintenance lien, emergency structural repairs." Marcus slowly added the figures. $146,000. He looked at Rachel. "I don't have anything close to that." "I know. If we can't pay, the county can force a sale." Marcus stared through the window toward the blooming orchard. Evelyn had not left him wealth. She had left him a mission wrapped inside a mountain of debt. As if that were not enough, Nia called from upstairs. "Dad?" Marcus climbed the staircase. She stood inside Evelyn's bedroom beside the old cedar chest. In her hands was the small brass key Evelyn had always worn around her neck. It opened something. Marcus looked down. The bottom of the chest had shifted. A hidden compartment. Inside lay only a faded photograph. Marcus picked it up. His breath caught. The picture showed the old reservoir control building. Standing beside Gate 4 was Grant Mercer. The photograph had been taken only 3 months earlier. Yet Grant had sworn he barely knew anything about the old water system. Marcus stared at the photograph until the edges bent beneath his fingers. Grant Mercer stood beside Gate 4 wearing work boots instead of polished dress shoes. One hand rested on the rusted control wheel. The date stamp in the corner read only 3 months earlier. "He lied," Nia whispered. Marcus nodded slowly. "He certainly didn't tell us the truth." Rachel examined the photograph under the bedroom light. "It proves he was here, but not why," Marcus said. "Exactly." She slipped the picture into an evidence sleeve. "It helps us. It doesn't win the case." Marcus knew she was right. In court, suspicion was never enough. Within days, Grant's response arrived. He denied ever trespassing. His attorney claimed Evelyn herself had invited him to inspect the historic irrigation structures before negotiating the sale. Rachel immediately requested visitor logs, phone records, and security footage. Nothing. Wren Hollow had no cameras, no gate records, no witnesses. The photograph raised questions. It answered none. The pressure intensified. On Monday morning, 3 county inspectors drove onto the farm. One examined the barns, another inspected the reservoir walls, the third measured the old greenhouse foundations. Marcus followed them quietly. By late afternoon, they handed him a thick packet. Unsafe structures, immediate repairs required. 2 barns were condemned. The western equipment shed was declared unstable. The old reservoir control building was restricted from public access. Estimated repair cost, nearly $80,000. Marcus folded the report without saying a word. As the inspectors drove away, Nia looked up at him. "Did someone report us?" "I'd be surprised if they didn't." The next blow came 2 days later. Their insurance carrier canceled the farm's policy. Reason: unreported structural hazard, potential flood risk. A representative apologized over the phone. "Mr. Reed, we're simply following company policy," Marcus asked quietly. "Who requested the emergency inspection?" "I'm not authorized to discuss that." The line went silent. He already knew the answer. Without insurance, suppliers stopped extending credit. The greenhouse repairs halted. Fuel deliveries were delayed. Replacement pump parts were refused unless paid in advance. Marcus emptied nearly every dollar he had saved. It wasn't enough. Then Dale Harlan came to see him. Marcus found him standing beside the workshop, hat in his hand. "I heard." Marcus nodded. "Everyone has." Dale looked embarrassed. "I can loan you some equipment." Marcus smiled faintly. "I thought Mercer still owned your business." "He owns my contract." Dale sighed. "But I still own my conscience." Marcus appreciated the offer. "I'll pay you." "You will?" "When?" "When this is over." Marcus almost laughed. "You sound more confident than I feel." Dale looked across the orchards. "Evelyn believed in you." "So?" "So she usually turned out to be right." For a few hopeful days, Marcus focused only on rebuilding. He repaired irrigation pipes, reinforced greenhouse frame, straightened damaged fencing. Neighbors occasionally stopped by. Some brought sandwiches. Others quietly left lumber near the barn without saying who had paid for it. Not everyone believed Grant Mercer, but very few were willing to oppose him publicly. The next letter arrived on a Thursday morning. It came from the Department of Family Services. Marcus read the first paragraph twice. Routine welfare assessment, anonymous complaint, unsafe living conditions, potential environmental hazards. Nia watched his face. "What is it?" He folded the letter. Someone says this farm isn't safe for you. She understood immediately. They're trying to scare us. Marcus didn't answer, because he wasn't sure. Maybe they were trying to do much more than scare them. Social worker Denise Hall visited the following afternoon. She spent nearly 2 hours touring the property. Marcus answered every question honestly. Denise spoke privately with Nia on the porch. When she finally prepared to leave, Marcus asked, "Do you think I'm putting my daughter at risk?" Denise looked around the farm. "I think you're doing everything possible." Marcus waited. But someone clearly wants this place declared unfit." She lowered her voice. "I've reviewed hundreds of anonymous complaints. This one wasn't written by a worried neighbor. It reads like a legal document." Marcus immediately thought of Calvin Rusk. Denise handed him her business card. "If anything changes, call me directly. You believe me? I believe evidence." She smiled gently. "So far, it favors you." The court hearing arrived 1 week later. Judge Harold Vance listened patiently as Rachel argued that the irrigation system required maintenance before spring storms arrived. Grant's legal team objected immediately. "The system has not been certified. It presents a public safety hazard." Marcus remained silent while engineers debated equipment they had never personally inspected. Finally, Judge Vance ruled, "Until ownership issues are resolved." He looked toward Marcus. "No party may activate or modify the historic water control structures." The gavel struck. Marcus closed his eyes. The one tool that might save the farm was now legally untouchable. Outside the courthouse, Grant waited beside his SUV. He removed a folded document from his coat. "This doesn't have to continue." Marcus stopped walking. Grant handed him a typed settlement offer. "Mercer Land and Water would pay every outstanding debt, cover all property taxes, provide Marcus $150,000, withdraw all pending legal actions, assist in resolving the family services complaint. In exchange, Marcus would immediately transfer Wren Hollow Farm." Grant spoke calmly. "You walk away. You start over. Your daughter grows up without lawsuit." Marcus stared at the offer. $150,000. No more debt. No more fear of losing Nia. No more endless court battles. For one terrible moment, he imagined signing. That evening, he sat alone inside the farmhouse. The unsigned agreement lay on the kitchen table. Nia quietly entered. She didn't ask permission before reading it. When she finished, she looked at her father. "You're thinking about it." Marcus didn't lie. "Yes." She nodded. "I would be too." He looked surprised. "I thought you'd be angry." "I am." "At me?" "No." She folded the paper carefully. "I'm angry because they're making you choose." Marcus rubbed both hands across his face. "I don't know what's right anymore." Nia walked to the window overlooking the orchard. "Evelyn didn't leave us this farm because she thought it would be easy." Marcus remained silent. "She left it because she believed we wouldn't run." Her voice trembled slightly. "If you sell because it's the right thing." She turned toward him. "I'll help pack." Marcus looked up. "But if you sell because you're afraid," a long pause, "then we'll spend the rest of our lives wondering what we gave away." Those words stayed with Marcus long after Nia went upstairs. He looked toward the unsigned settlement, then quietly tore it in half. The retaliation came faster than he expected. Near midnight, Marcus woke to the smell of smoke. "Dad!" Nia's voice echoed from upstairs. He rushed outside. Flames climbed through the roof of the old seed storage shed. The dry timber burned with terrifying speed. Marcus grabbed the nearest hose. Water pressure barely reached the building. Neighbors arrived within minutes. Volunteer firefighters soon followed. But by sunrise, the shed had collapsed. Black smoke drifted across the orchard. Evelyn's lifetime collection of regional heirloom seeds appeared to be gone. Marcus walked through the wet ashes in stunned silence. Everything she had preserved, everything she had protected, reduced to charred beam. Then his boot struck something metal. A dull clang echoed beneath the ash. It knelt, scraped away burned wood. A small fireproof tin box emerged from beneath the floor. Its latch had survived. Marcus opened it carefully. Inside lay several folded engineering drawings and the missing pages from Thomas Wren's final notebook. Marcus carried the fireproof tin into the farmhouse as though it contained glass. Outside, firefighters continued spraying the smoking remains of the seed shed while dawn slowly pushed the darkness away. The smell of wet ash drifted through the open kitchen window. Rachel Kim arrived less than 20 minutes later. She removed soot-covered gloves before Marcus placed the tin on the dining table. "No one touches anything until we document it." she said. Marcus nodded. He had already learned that evidence lost in haste often disappeared forever. Rachel photographed the exterior from every angle before carefully lifting the lid. Inside lay 3 rolled engineering drawings wrapped in oilcloth. Beneath them rested a bundle of handwritten pages tied with faded string. Thomas Wren's missing notebook. Exactly where Evelyn had hidden it decades earlier. Marcus unfolded the first page. The handwriting was hurried but unmistakably Thomas's. He began reading aloud. Gate 4 did not fail. It was closed before the storm reached the valley. The room became silent. Nia slowly pulled out a chair. Rachel continued taking notes. Marcus turned the page. Leonard Mercer ordered the diversion because his construction crews had not completed the upstream drainage canal. If the reservoir followed its designed pattern, the unfinished excavation would collapse. Marcus stopped reading. Rachel looked up. So Thomas knew. Marcus nodded. He knew almost immediately. The next several pages described rainfall measurements, water pressure calculations, and hand-drawn timeline. Thomas had reconstructed the entire sequence of the flood. According to his records, the emergency system had functioned exactly as designed until someone manually sealed Gate 4. Once the gate closed, pressure built inside the western channel. The overflow that should have spread safely across protected farmland instead rushed toward the Wren property and the south edge of Bellwether. Daniel Wren had been inspecting that section when the surge arrived. Marcus closed the notebook for a moment. 40 years. An entire family had lived beneath the weight of a lie for 4 decades. Rachel carefully unfolded the engineering drawing. Unlike the notebooks, these plans were almost architectural in their precision. Every underground pipe, every limestone channel, every emergency spillway, everything connected. Marcus immediately recognized what he was looking at. This isn't just irrigation. Rachel waited. It's a complete flood management network. He spread the drawings across the table. Look here. He traced a blue line running beneath the orchards. Stormwater enters from the western ridge. His finger moved farther. It reaches this balancing reservoir. Another line. Then gravity distributes the flow through 6 release gates. Rachel frowned. So? Marcus looked directly at her. If all 6 gates operate together, he paused. Bellwether doesn't flood. Nia stared at the map. So Evelyn's farm was protecting the whole town. Marcus finished quietly. Later that afternoon, Sheriff Elaine Porter arrived with evidence back. Marcus handed her Thomas's notebook. She read the first several pages without speaking. When she finished, she looked toward Marcus. This changes the historical investigation. It also changes the present. Rachel pointed toward the engineering plans. Grant Mercer wasn't buying farmland. He was buying infrastructure. Sheriff Porter nodded thoughtfully. If these drawings are authentic, they are. Marcus interrupted. They match the hydraulic layouts I found beneath the orchard. The sheriff believed him, but belief wasn't enough. Court requires corroboration. Marcus understood. Thomas's notebooks established a story. They still needed independent evidence. That evidence began appearing from an unexpected source. Miriam Cole called just before sunset. I found something. Marcus, Rachel, and Sheriff Porter drove straight to the county archive. Miriam waited beside an old reel-to-reel tape recorder. I almost threw this away years ago. She gently placed a cassette on the table. Who's on it? Rachel asked. The former county flood inspector. Marcus frowned. I thought he died. He did. Miriam nodded, but his daughter donated several boxes after the funeral. No one ever listened to everything. Sheriff Porter inserted the cassette into a recorder. Static filled the room. Then an elderly man's tired voice emerged. My name is Harold Pike. Another burst of static. I've carried this for 27 years. The room became perfectly still. Thomas Wren was innocent. Marcus slowly sat down. Harold Pike continued, Leonard Mercer paid me to approve the final inspection. Rachel exchanged a stunned glance with the sheriff. Gate 4 had already been altered. The voice cracked. I signed the report anyway. Silence. Then one final sentence. If anyone ever hears this, tell Evelyn I was a coward. The recording ended. No one spoke for several seconds. Sheriff Porter carefully removed the cassette. His confession won't automatically convict anyone. Marcus nodded, but it confirms Thomas wasn't lying. It does. The following morning, Nia disappeared into Evelyn's study carrying 3 gardening journals. Marcus found her nearly an hour later, surrounded by open notebooks. What are you doing? Reading. He smiled. That's obvious. I'm looking for pattern. Marcus sat beside her. Nia pointed to dozens of identical phrases scattered through the journals. The orchard that drinks first. Marcus read them. The phrase appeared again and again. Spring, summer, autumn, even drought years. The orchard that drinks first. He frowned. That's not gardening. Nia smiled. I didn't think so. Marcus closed one journal. Evelyn never repeated herself unless it mattered. They carried the journals outside. Standing beneath the oldest apple trees, Marcus compared the entries with Thomas's engineering map. Then suddenly everything aligned. The first orchard isn't first because it's oldest. Nia looked up. It's first because Marcus began walking quickly across the field. Water reaches it before anywhere else. They stopped beneath a massive apple tree nearly 90 years old. Marcus tapped the ground with a steel rod. Solid. Again. Solid. One more step. Clang. Metal. Nia's eyes widened. Marcus cleared away several inches of soil. An iron hatch slowly emerged beneath layers of roots and moss. He pulled. Nothing. Rust held it shut. After several minutes with penetrating oil and a pry bar, the hatch finally opened. Cold air rushed upward. Stone steps disappeared into darkness. Marcus switched on his flashlight. Below them stretched a narrow underground chamber. The walls were lined with hydraulic control pipe, pressure gauges, valve wheels, modern electrical wiring. He stopped halfway down the stairs. This isn't possible. Nia joined him carefully. What? Marcus pointed toward the floor. Fresh, muddy footprints. Someone had been inside recently, very recently, even more disturbing. Several sensor wires had been cleanly cut, not chewed by animals, not damaged by age. Gut. Deliberately, Marcus knelt beside the wiring. The monitoring system was disabled. He looked toward the main control valve. If nobody noticed, he suddenly understood. The whole emergency system could fail without warning. Rachel arrived minutes later. She photographed everything. Sheriff Porter dusted several surfaces for fingerprint. Marcus examined the hydraulic gauges. One reading immediately alarmed him. Water pressure was already unusually high for the season. He climbed back outside and checked the sky. Heavy clouds stretched across the western horizon. His phone vibrated. A weather alert. Flash flood watch. Expected rainfall. 8 to 10 inches within 48 hours. Marcus looked back toward the underground chamber, then toward Bellwether in the distance. If Thomas's calculations were correct, and if the emergency system remained disabled, the coming storm would place the entire town in danger. As Sheriff Porter sealed the entrance with evidence tape, another deputy hurried across the orchard carrying a printed report. Sheriff, she turned. We matched the boot prints. Marcus's heartbeat quickened. To who? The deputy handed her a photograph from a nearby gas station's security camera. Sheriff Porter studied it for only a second before looking up. Her expression had completely changed. The prints belonged to boots purchased 3 days before the fire. Marcus waited. The buyer was identified. She handed him the photograph. Standing at the checkout counter, wearing the same boots that had crossed Wren Hollow, was Calvin Rusk. Marcus stared at the security photograph for several long seconds. Calvin Rusk stood beneath the fluorescent lights of the gas station convenience store, holding a pair of heavy waterproof work boots still inside their box. The timestamp was unmistakable. 3 days before the fire, 3 days before fresh boot prints appeared inside the hidden hydraulic chamber. Rachel took the photograph from his hand. This places him in the area. Sheriff Porter nodded, but not inside the chamber. Marcus folded his arms. It does something more important. The sheriff looked at him. It proves he prepared for work in the mud before anyone even knew there would be an investigation. Calvin arrived at the sheriff's office the next afternoon with his own attorney. He appeared composed, confident, almost amused. Sheriff Porter placed the gas station photograph on the table. You purchased these boots? Yes. Why? My old pair wore out. Were you at Wren Hollow the night of the fire? I visited the property several times. With permission, I was conducting legal business. Marcus watched from behind the observation window. Calvin answered every question carefully. Never too much, never too little. He admitted only what could already be proven, nothing more. When the interview ended, Rachel sighed. He's protecting someone. Marcus didn't ask who. He already knew. The approaching storm changed everything. Weather forecasts became increasingly alarming. 8 inches of rain became 10. 10 became 12. The National Weather Service issued a flood emergency for 3 surrounding counties. Bellwether sat directly in the projected path. Marcus spread Thomas's engineering maps across the farmhouse table. He compared rainfall projections with reservoir capacity. Pressure calculation. Overflow channels. The numbers made his stomach tighten. If the western spillway stays blocked, Rachel looked up. What happens? Marcus pointed toward the map. The water can't spread into the reservoir basin. His finger traced the downstream route. It keeps building. Until? It reaches the south side. Nia frowned. That's where most of the older neighborhoods are. Marcus nodded. Nearly 800 families. Rachel requested an emergency court hearing. Judge Harold Vance agreed to hear the matter the following morning. The courtroom filled before sunrise. Farmers, shop owners, teachers, reporters from neighboring counties. Everyone had heard the forecasts. Rachel stood first. Your Honor, we have recovered engineering plans proving Wren Hollow contains Bellwether's original flood control system. She presented Thomas's notebook. The survey map, Harold Pike's recorded confession, engineering diagram, Sheriff Porter's evidence report. Then Marcus took the witness stand. Judge Vance looked toward him. Mr. Reed, explain this system in terms the court can understand. Marcus unfolded the largest engineering drawing. He spoke calmly. When Bellwether was founded, flooding happened every few years. He pointed toward the western hill. Thomas Wren designed a gravity-fed network that slowed floodwater before it reached town. Another section, the reservoir stored excess water. Another, the orchards absorbed overflow. Another, the underground limestone channels released pressure gradually. Judge Vance nodded. And if nothing is done, Marcus looked directly at him. Bellwether floods. Silence settled across the courtroom. Grant Mercer rose slowly. So we're trusting a former mechanic? Marcus remained calm. Grant walked toward the engineering diagrams. These plans are 40 years old. They are. The structures are deteriorated. Some are. You cannot guarantee they'll function. No. Grant turned toward the judge. There it is. He spread his hands. This man wants authorization to activate unstable infrastructure during the largest storm in decades. Rachel objected. He mischaracterizes the testimony. Judge Vance allowed Grant to continue. Grant looked back at Marcus. If these gates fail, he paused. How many people die? Marcus answered honestly. I don't know. Grant nodded dramatically. Exactly. He faced the courtroom. My company has spent years proposing modern flood protection. Someone from the audience shouted, You mean your warehouse project? Grant didn't react. I've invested millions into Bellwether. His voice grew stronger. I employ local families. I pay local taxes. And now one man wants to gamble everything on abandoned machinery. Many people exchanged uncertain glances. Marcus understood. Grant wasn't arguing engineering. He was arguing fear. Then Rachel stood again. We've also retained a forensic document examiner. A woman approached, carrying several enlarged photographs. She projected them onto a screen. One image showed Evelyn's authentic signature from a gardening journal. The other showed the purchase agreement. They appear identical, the expert began. Because they are. Grant frowned. The expert zoomed into microscopic details. The pressure patterns are impossible. She highlighted several points. Natural handwriting varies. These do not. Another enlargement appeared. The signature on the purchase agreement is a digital transfer created from a scanned original. Whispers filled the courtroom. The expert continued. It was not handwritten onto the contract. It was copied. Rachel handed the judge another report. We also subpoenaed scanner metadata from Rusk Legal Services. Judge Vance adjusted his glasses. The purchase agreement was assembled. He looked toward Calvin. 2 days after Mrs. Wren signed unrelated tax documents. Calvin's face lost color. Grant slowly turned toward him. Very slowly. For the first time since this battle began, Grant looked uncertain. Calvin whispered, I can explain. Grant's voice remained low. Not here. Judge Vance struck his gavel. The alleged purchase agreement is suspended pending criminal investigation. Rachel closed her eyes briefly. One battle had finally been won. But not the war. Outside the courthouse, the sky had turned nearly black. Thunder rolled across the valley. Rain began falling before anyone reached their vehicles. Marcus's phone rang. It was the county engineering office. He answered immediately. This is Marcus. The engineer's voice shook. The western drainage station just failed. Marcus froze. What? The primary pumps lost power. Backup generators? Flooded. Marcus looked toward the dark horizon. How much time? A pause. Less than an hour before the South Basin starts overflowing. Marcus ended the call and looked at Rachel. We're out of time. They raced toward Bellwether. Rain pounded the windshield so hard the wipers struggled to keep up. Creeks overflowed their banks. Roadside ditches disappeared beneath brown water. As they crossed the county bridge, Marcus looked downstream. His heart sank. Water wasn't following Thomas's maps. It was backing up. He immediately understood why. Grant's new commercial construction. The unfinished access roads, temporary retaining walls. huge piles of fill dirt. Everything his company had built over the past 2 years had narrowed the natural overflow route. The stormwater had nowhere to go. Marcus whispered. He made it worse. Rachel looked out the window. Can you prove it? Marcus pointed. I don't have to. The flood will. By the time they reached Wren Hollow, volunteers were already stacking sandbags around nearby homes. Sirens echoed across Bellwether. Sheriff Porter stepped out of her patrol SUV. We've evacuated the lowest streets. Marcus looked toward the old reservoir. We have to activate the system. She hesitated. The court never authorized it. Marcus knew. Judge Vance had suspended the fraudulent contract, but he had no. I've acting the dating dot. The earlier order forbidding operation of the historic gates without certified inspection. Legally, Marcus still could not touch the control. Lightning split the sky. A deafening crack echoed across the valley. Seconds later, a county engineer came running through the rain. His face was white. The South Levee won't hold. Marcus looked toward Bellwether, toward the frightened families loading children into trucks, toward Nia standing silently beside the farmhouse porch. He felt the familiar paralysis rising inside him, the same hesitation that had haunted every difficult decision since Lena's death. Then Nia stepped beside him. She didn't raise her voice. She simply looked into his eyes. Fear didn't answer Mom's phone. Marcus stared at her. It doesn't get to answer this. At that exact moment, Sheriff Porter's radio crackled to life. The dispatcher's voice was almost drowned by static. Emergency update. Water has entered the South District. Repeat. Residents trapped. Marcus closed his eyes for one heartbeat. When he opened them again, he knew exactly what he had to do. Rain slammed against the roof of the control barn so violently that conversation became impossible. Marcus pushed open the heavy steel door and stepped inside. Water seeped across the concrete floor, swirling around decades-old machinery that had not carried this much pressure in generations. The brass key felt heavier than metal. It felt like every promise Evelyn had ever made. Behind him, Sheriff Elaine Porter entered with 2 deputies. Rachel Kim followed close behind, clutching a waterproof case filled with Thomas Wren's engineering drawings. Nia carried Evelyn's weathered gardening journal beneath her jacket. A pair of headlights cut through the rain. Grant Mercer's SUV skidded to a stop outside. He climbed out before the engine had even died. "You can't do this!" His voice echoed through the storm. One deputy stepped between Grant and the control panel. Grant held a folded document above his head. "I have a standing court order." Sheriff Porter took the paper without looking at it. "I know exactly what it says." "Then stop him." "No." Grant stared. "The order still exists," she continued. "But so does a town full of people whose lives are in immediate danger." Inside the control barn, Marcus spread Thomas's engineering plans across the old steel table. Most of the ink had faded, but every valve sequence remained readable. He pointed towards 6 numbered control wheels. Gate 1 opens first. His finger moved. Then 3, then 6. Rachel frowned. "Why not in order?" "Pressure balance," Marcus answered without hesitation. "If we release them incorrectly," he looked toward the vibrating walls. The reservoir could rupture. Nia opened Evelyn's journal. "I found something." Everyone turned. Several pages contained identical sketches of tiny wrens flying between numbered gates. Next to each drawing, Evelyn had written only 4 words. "Always trust Thomas's rhythm." Marcus looked at the engineering plans again, then suddenly smiled. "It isn't numerical." Rachel blinked. "What?" "The sequence." He pointed toward the bird. Thomas numbered the gates by construction date. Nia continued reading, but Evelyn remembered them by water flow. Marcus's eyes widened. She rewrote the order. He quickly rearranged the sequence. 1, 3, 5, 4, 6. And gate 4. He stopped. Last. The room fell silent. Gate 4. The same gate Leonard Mercer had secretly closed 40 years earlier. Grant forced his way inside. "You're making a mistake." Marcus didn't answer. Grant stepped closer. "You know those structures haven't been fully tested." "I know. They could fail." "They could, then stop." Marcus finally faced him. "What happens if I don't?" Grant hesitated. For the first time since they had met, he looked genuinely tired. "My company collapses." Marcus frowned. Grant laughed bitterly. "You think this was only greed?" "It wasn't?" Grant shook his head. "You've never signed payroll for hundreds of families." Rain pounded harder against the roof. "My father left me debt, bad investments, failed developments. I spent years trying to save what he built." Marcus listened quietly. Grant continued. "If Bellwether kept shrinking, My company died, so I found another way. Rachel stared at him. By destroying property values? Grant closed his eyes. I plan to rebuild everything. Marcus answered softly. After buying it cheap, Grant said nothing. Silence became his confession. Another vehicle screeched to a stop outside. Calvin Rusk stumbled through the rain. His expensive suit was soaked. He looked more frightened than Marcus had ever seen him. I need to speak to the sheriff. Sheriff Porter stepped forward. What is it? Calvin looked toward Grant, then away. I'll testify. Grant's head snapped toward him. You what? Calvin swallowed hard. I kept copies. Copies of what? Rachel demanded. Everything. He pulled a waterproof flash drive from his pocket. Emails. Contract. Construction directive. Grant took one furious step forward. You idiot. Calvin ignored him. There are instructions ordering us to disable monitoring sensors beneath Wren Hollow. Marcus felt every muscle tight. Calvin continued. There are invoices for forged survey report. Rachel reached for the flash drive. And the purchase agreement? Calvin nodded. I assembled it. Grant whispered. You promised. Calvin laughed once. No. I promised until people started dying. He pointed toward the rising water outside. This wasn't the plan anymore. Sheriff Porter immediately handed the flash drive to a deputy. Evidence. Grant slowly realized he was standing alone. Sheriff Porter's phone rang. She answered instantly. Judge Harold Vance's voice came through the speaker. I've reviewed the emergency reports. Wind nearly drowned him out. Mr. Reed. Marcus stepped closer. Yes, Your Honor. I cannot legally authorize an uninspected hydraulic system. Marcus expected that answer. But the judge continued. I also cannot order you to watch people drown. The room became still. If you activate the system, his voice grew quieter. You do so under your own responsibility. Rachel understood immediately. No authorization, no protection. If Marcus succeeded, he might still face criminal charges. If he failed, hundreds could die. Judge Vance spoke one final sentence. History will decide whether your judgment was wiser than mine. The line disconnected. Grant suddenly laughed. You hear that? He looked at Marcus. Even the judge won't save you. You open those gates, you own every consequence. Marcus looked through the open doorway. Across the valley, emergency lights flashed through sheets of rain. Children, parents, grandparents, people who had believed Grant, people who had doubted Marcus. None of that mattered now. He reached for the brass key. Grant moved toward him. If this fails, before he could finish, a deafening crack echoed outside. One of the retaining walls above the reservoir had begun to give way. Water burst through a narrow opening. Marcus looked at the gauges. Pressure was climbing too fast. There wasn't another minute to lose. Grant suddenly lunged toward the control panel. Marcus caught his arm. The two men struggled briefly across the wet concrete floor. Grant slipped. His shoulder struck an iron railing. For one terrible moment, he dangled above the rushing maintenance channel below. The current slammed against the concrete with frightening force. Grant reached upward. Marcus, their eyes met. Marcus remembered every lie, every threat, every forged document, every night Nia had cried without letting him hear. He could let go. No one would ever know. The floodwater roared beneath them. Then Marcus tightened his grip. With every ounce of strength he had, he pulled Grant back onto solid ground. Sheriff Porter immediately handcuffed him. Grant looked up in disbelief. You, Marcus answered quietly. Evelyn taught me the difference between justice and revenge. He turned toward the control panel. The brass key slid into the ancient lock. One turn, a deep metallic click echoed beneath the floor. Gate 1, Marcus shouted. The first wheel rotated. Water thundered through hidden tunnels. Gate 3, another release. The building trembled. Gate 5, pressure dropped slightly. Nia watched the gauges. They're stabilizing. Then, a violent grinding noise. Marcus looked toward the final indicator. Gate 4. It hadn't moved. The pressure needle surged into the red. Rachel looked at him. What happened? Marcus's face went pale. The manual release. He grabbed a flashlight. It's Yammed. Sheriff Porter blocked the stairwell leading into the maintenance tunnel. Marcus, it's flooding down there. I know. You won't make it back. Marcus looked toward Nia. For just a second, neither of them spoke. Then she walked over and placed Evelyn's journal in his hand. You already taught me something. Marcus waited. Doing the right thing comes before knowing what it costs. He smiled through the fear. I did say that. You still have to believe it. Marcus nodded once. He climbed into the flooded tunnel. Water reached his waist almost immediately. Each step became harder. The current pulled at his legs. Behind him, Rachel shouted valve pressures while Nia searched frantically through Evelyn's journal. Dad. Her voice echoed through the tunnel. Thomas changed the emergency sequence. Marcus looked back. What? The final release isn't clockwise. She held up the journal. Evelyn wrote. Her eyes found the page. When Gate 4 refuses to open, trust the river, not the handle. Marcus suddenly understood. The valve had to be turned, the opposite direction. He threw every bit of strength into the rusted wheel. For one terrifying second, nothing happened. Then, the mechanism exploded into motion. A thunderous surge shook the mountain beneath Wren Hollow. Far above, 6 ancient gates opened in perfect succession. Water that had been racing toward Bellwether turned. It spread across the lower orchard, filled the emergency basin, flowed through Thomas Wren's forgotten channels exactly as they had been designed decades earlier. From the hilltop, Sheriff Porter watched in disbelief as the floodwater divided into dozens of controlled streams instead of one devastating wall. Emergency radios erupted with new reports. The South District is holding. Water levels are dropping. Houses are clear. Bellwether was still standing. Marcus climbed back out of the maintenance tunnel exhausted, soaked, and barely able to remain on his feet. Nia threw her arms around him before he had taken 2 steps. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them needed to. When dawn finally broke through the thinning clouds, Marcus walked outside. The town had survived, but as he looked across Wren Hollow, his heart tightened. Hundreds of acres of Evelyn's orchards lay beneath nearly 6 feet of muddy water. The farm had absorbed the flood exactly as Thomas intended. Bellwether had been saved, and the inheritance Evelyn had entrusted to Marcus appeared to have sacrificed itself to do it. Sunrise revealed the true cost of the night before. The floodwater had begun to recede, but Wren Hollow looked almost unrecognizable. The lower orchards, where Evelyn had planted generations of apple trees, stood beneath layers of mud. Fences had vanished. Greenhouses leaned at impossible angles. The western pasture had become a shallow lake reflecting the pale morning sky. Marcus stood silently at the edge of the flooded field. He had expected to feel victory. Instead, he felt grief. Nia walked beside him, carrying Evelyn's gardening journal, now wrapped carefully in dry cloth. "We saved them," she said softly. Marcus nodded. "We did." She looked across the ruined orchard, and she knew this would happen. Marcus slowly turned toward her. The reservoir wasn't built to save the farm. He looked back at the valley below. It was built so the farm could save everyone else. At that moment, he finally understood why Evelyn had never spoken of Wren Hollow as property. She had always called it a responsibility. By noon, engineers from the Missouri Department of Natural Resources arrived. They spent hours inspecting every gate, every spillway, and every underground channel. Marcus answered dozens of technical questions. He showed them Thomas's drawing. He explained the manual release sequence. He described the disabled sensors he had discovered beneath the orchard. Near sunset, the lead engineer approached Sheriff Porter. "I've inspected flood control systems for 26 years. He looked toward Marcus. "If those gates hadn't opened when they did," he paused, "Bellwether would have been underwater." Sheriff Porter slowly nodded. "So his decision saved the town." It almost certainly did. For the first time since the storm began, Marcus allowed himself to breathe. The criminal investigation moved quickly. Calvin Rusk honored his agreement to cooperate. The encrypted files on the flash drive contained hundreds of emails, invoices, internal memoranda, and engineering reports. Some described forged legal documents. Others detailed payments made through shell companies. One message from Grant Mercer stood out. "If the monitoring system stays offline another season, property values along the South Basin will continue falling. We acquire first, restore later." The date was 18 months old. Another email authorized payments to contractors for night maintenance at Wren Hollow. Those contractors admitted they had been ordered to disable sensors and remove historical records without being told why. Within 2 weeks, a grand jury returned multiple indictments. Grant Mercer was charged with fraud, conspiracy, forgery, evidence tampering, arson conspiracy, and reckless endangerment. Calvin pleaded guilty to lesser charges in exchange for full cooperation. When deputies led Grant into the courthouse in handcuffs, cameras crowded the entrance. He never looked toward Marcus. Several weeks later, Judge Harold Vance reconvened probate court. The courtroom felt different this time. There were no whispers, no uncertainty. The judge adjusted his glasses before reading his ruling. After reviewing the evidence presented, this court finds the last will and testament of Evelyn Grace Wren to be valid in its entirety. He looked directly at Marcus. "Mr. Reed is confirmed as the lawful owner and steward of Wren Hollow Farm." quiet wave of relief moved through the courtroom. Judge Vance continued. This court further recognizes that Thomas Wren and Evelyn Wren were wrongly blamed for the flood 40 years ago. He paused. The historical record shall be corrected. Marcus closed his eyes. He wished Evelyn could have heard those words. Rachel leaned toward him. She already knew the truth. Marcus smiled faintly. Yes, but now everyone else does too. Bellwether changed in ways no one expected. Insurance settlements and assets seized from Mercer's companies helped repair damaged neighborhoods. The state approved grants to restore the historic flood control network. Former Mercer employees who had feared losing their livelihoods were offered new jobs rebuilding canals, bridges, and water infrastructure. Dale Harlan visited the farm one afternoon carrying his old clipboard. I've got your position waiting. Marcus laughed. I appreciate that. You turning me down? Marcus looked across the orchard where volunteers were replacing broken fence posts. I think I already found my next job. Dale followed his gaze. I suppose you did. Before leaving, he extended his hand. I should have stood up for you sooner. Marcus shook it firmly. We both get another chance. One surprise remained. As volunteers cleared debris from beneath the old farmhouse, Nia discovered another concealed room connected to the underground hydraulic chamber. Inside were rows of climate-controlled cabinets. Rachel stared in disbelief. The seed collection. Marcus carefully opened one drawer. Hundreds of labeled envelopes remained perfectly dry. Rare apples, heirloom corn, native beans, historic vegetables preserved over 70 years. Nia smiled through tears. Evelyn moved them. Marcus nodded. She expected someone would eventually come after the shed. The burned building had been nothing more than a decoy. Even after her death, Evelyn had protected the future. During a town meeting held inside the restored community center, Marcus stood before hundreds of residents. Many had once doubted him. Some had openly criticized him. Now they waited quietly. Marcus unfolded a single page. I'm not reopening Wren Hollow as a private farm. Murmurs spread through the room. I'm creating the Bellwether Agricultural Resilience Cooperative. A large drawing appeared behind him. The cooperative would include shared equipment for small farmers, emergency floodwater storage, affordable produce for local families, apprenticeships for high school students, seed preservation, agricultural engineering workshops, community gardens. Nobody applauded immediately. Then an elderly farmer stood. I'd like to volunteer. Another voice followed. So would I. Within seconds, dozens of hands rose. By the end of the evening, more than 100 residents had signed up to help rebuild. Summer returned. The orchards slowly recovered. Many older trees survived despite weeks underwater. New saplings filled empty spaces. Children who had once played on flooded streets now helped plant vegetables beside retired farmers. Near the entrance stood a new wooden sign, Wren Hollow Agricultural Resilience Cooperative. Below it, in smaller letters, Stewardship before ownership. Marcus smiled every time he read it. One quiet afternoon, Marcus drove alone to Lena's grave. He placed a single apple blossom beside the headstone. For a long time, he said nothing. Then, finally, I answered this one. Wind moved gently through the cemetery. I spent 4 years believing one missed phone call defined the rest of my life. His voice cracked. It didn't. He looked toward the sky. I couldn't save you. A long pause, but I stopped letting that keep me from saving someone else. He stood there until sunset before quietly walking away. For the first time since Lena's death, the weight he had carried no longer felt impossible. Exactly 1 year later, Bellwether celebrated its first harvest festival in decades. Music drifted across Wren Hollow. Families filled picnic tables beneath rows of restored apple trees. Children laughed as they chased one another beside the reopened stone channels carrying clear water once again. Nia proudly stood beside a young apple tree with a small bronze plaque. Evelyn's promise. Marcus walked over. You named it. She nodded. It seemed right. He touched the little tree gently. It's going to help a lot of people someday. So did she. Marcus smiled. Yes. Nia handed him the first apple harvested from the new orchard. She looked across the valley where Bellwether stretched peacefully beneath the afternoon sun. She didn't leave us a farm. Marcus looked at Evelyn's old house, at Thomas's restored reservoir, at neighbors working together where strangers once argued. He smiled. No. He placed an arm around Nia's shoulders. She left us something worth protecting. Together they watched children running through the orchard as clean water flowed quietly through the ancient stone channels, no longer hidden, no longer forgotten, but finally serving the town exactly as Evelyn and Thomas Wren had always hoped. Life has a quiet way of testing what we truly believe. Marcus never stopped to help Evelyn because he expected an inheritance. He stopped because leaving someone stranded on a freezing roadside would have betrayed the values he wanted his daughter to learn. That single decision changed not only his future, but the future of an entire town. We often measure success by what we own, yet this story reminds us that the greatest legacies are built through trust, character, and responsibility. Evelyn understood that wealth without purpose eventually disappears, while kindness passed from one person to another can continue for generations. Marcus also discovered something deeply personal. Guilt can keep us from living just as surely as fear can keep us from acting. He could not rewrite the tragedy of losing Lena, but he could decide what kind of man he would become afterward. In choosing justice over revenge, service over profit, and courage over certainty, he gave his daughter the example she needed more than any inheritance. Sometimes the most valuable thing we receive is not land, money, or success. It is the chance to protect something greater than ourselves. If this story touched your heart, let us know where you're watching from and what lessons stayed with you the most. And if you enjoy powerful stories about family, resilience, and second chances, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next journey.